you inquisitive igloo owners. Welcome to today's episode of Why Come No One Told Me That, which is my series where I go in depth on the different aspects of makeup and skincare. Today we are talking about bronzer on your face. I'm really excited about this video, so let's just dive right in, shall we? First of all, I want to talk about the somewhat complicated relationship between bronzer and contouring that has developed over the last few years and lend some clarification that I think is much needed. To address that, let's define bronzer real quick and also kind of think about why we use it. With the little disclaimer, of course, that use makeup however makes you happy inside of your heart, and if you don't like what I'm saying, then congratulations, don't listen to it. Lots of people don't listen to me all the time. So bronzer was originally intended to make you look like you've just been on a fantastic vacation and you are you with a tan. So with that in mind, bronzer, oh my lordy. You guys don't know this because I've cut out the other takes, but I have said bronzer as bronder many, many times in the last 2 minutes. Anyway, with that in mind, bronzer is somewhat subjective, but it also has a few guidelines inherent if that is your intention. You just want to make yourself look healthy and like you've been on vacation and you're just like so relaxed and living your best life. So the sort of secondary purpose that has emerged for bronzer is contouring. And that's interesting because I think actually the only way to explain this stuff makes sense is to do a little mini art class right now, which is my favorite. Yay! Yeah, let's just do that right now. Let's go all in, not just the tip, like we're doing this. Okay, makeup is painting just on your face, and painting is manipulating people's eyeballs and their perceptions to influence what they're seeing. When you contour, you're trying to trick people's eyes into thinking that your face looks different than it actually does, or that it's just a more enhanced version of itself. When you put on eyeshadow, like right now, I'm not trying to trick people into thinking that I have shimmery copper eyelids, but when you put on a contour powder or stick, you're trying to trick people into thinking not, oh look, she has put product on, but just to think, wow, look at her cheekbones. Those are really nice. And whether you realize it or not, when you do that, you are using art theory. And I think I'm being really confusing right now, but it will all make sense in a minute. Fingers crossed. When you contour, you're trying to replicate, enhance, or maybe slightly change the shape of the shadows that are naturally on your face. So if you look at my face right now, I'm not wearing any contouring products or anything. There is a shadow underneath my cheekbone, and that says to people's eyes, hey, there's a thing there. In people's eyeball to brain communication system, highlights say that something is closer or more pronounced, and shadows say that something is receding or it is further away, or just that something is obscuring light from hitting it. So there's the sun, there's lighting around you. That's why people can see you, because there's light. And a shadow says something is blocking the light from hitting this, so there's something there. In this case, it's my cheekbone. You can look at it and see it right there. It's just always gonna be there. When you contour, you're like, I'm just gonna put a little real life filter on and just increase the contrast. And that's going to make it seem like this is more pronounced and therefore casting a more pronounced shadow. Shadows have a few inherent qualities. They are darker than the surrounding area and they are also less saturated. So this is where contouring and bronzer have a weird overlap because they share some qualities but not all, and therefore in some situations they can replace each other and in others they cannot. Bronzers replicate tans, and tans are naturally warm. They're a couple shades darker than your skin tone, but they're also more red because a tan that's the way that skin changes when sun hits it a lot. It just gets darker and warmer, whereas shadows get darker and cooler. That doesn't mean that there's this really hard and fast rule. Some people are like, contours are ashy and bronzer is not, and they can never be one another. The fact is, because bronzers are darker than your skin tone, they do some level of natural contouring. They do make areas seem more pushed back, and they do increase the contrast of your face. So if you put a bronzer under your cheekbone, it will increase the contrast. What it won't do is look like a fully natural shadow on its own because it is warmer, whereas a contouring product specifically to enhance shadows is going to be desaturated, ashier, cooler. So what that means is that if you're doing a bronzed look, when you put bronzer on your cheekbones, it is going to contour a little bit and it's going to look totally natural if you're doing an overall bronzed look. What looks weird and what bothers my eyeballs and a lot of makeup artists is when people use bronzer as a contouring product and they're not like hitting the areas where a tan happens, they're just putting under the cheekbones or they're just hitting like the contouring spots. That makes me do that, but it's okay. If that makes you happy, then like just you do you know what I mean? But if you're trying to naturally look contoured or naturally look tanned, it's best to understand this. So like when I'm contouring and bronzing someone, I will apply bronzer to the areas where the sun naturally hits the face, which I'm going to show you when I do a little demonstration of bronzer in a moment. And that's going to be like forehead, nose, cheekbones. Just look at Jennifer Aniston and be like, oh, okay, she's got tan kind of cascading on the forehead, the nose, the cheekbones, and then a little bit everywhere else spread out. But that's mainly the bullet points. The big difference is obviously a tan is going to be like darkest here, sprinkling down, whereas contouring, you're trying to do one of these guys. So I will apply bronzer in that placement, and then I will take an ashier contouring product and just hit the points that I want to increase the depth of. But you don't always have to do that. So like I look more contoured right now than I did when I just had foundation on my face, and I didn't put a contouring product on, I just did bronzer. And that's okay because increasing the contrast was enough because my natural shadow is working with the bronzer to just, everything looks more dynamic than it did when it was flat with just foundation or just my skin. I could also just as easily do a look without bronzer if I wasn't going for like a golden glow situation and I wanted to do something maybe more pale and I could contour and not put bronzer on. I could do both or I could do just bronzer. So it's really just the overall look you're going for. The big no-no, as far as those even exist in the world of makeup, in my opinion, and that of a lot of the pro artists that I work with, is just don't use a bronzer just in lieu of a contouring product if you're not doing a bronzed look, because that is just, it's not going to read to people's eyeballs as a shadow. It's going to look like, hey, that's a place to put makeup, I guess. So yeah, that kind of addresses that whole deal. And then the next videos in this series that I'm going to do are on contouring, highlighting, and blush placement, and these all kind of work together to enhance the structure of your face and the coloring of it, and just like make this beautiful little eel, I guess is what my hands are kind of doing, to make this beautiful face eel. Why do I always say stuff that sounds gross? I can't help it. My point is, it's this machine, eel machine. The point is, together, bronzer, contouring, highlighting, and cheek color, blush can have this harmonious relationship that looks great. It's just nice to understand sort of the eyeball theories that go behind them so that everybody stays in their lane. All right, so with that in mind, let's just talk about bronzer for the purpose of making your skin look healthy and radiant and like you are just giving people FOMO all over the place on your Instagram with your plain wings and your toes in sand or whatever. Also for me, bronzer is just an essential like daily thing because, as you may have heard, the sun is really bad for your skin and it's deeply upsetting, especially for people like me, because I look like I have never I talk all the time, I promise. I'm like really good at it. You just don't know. You're not there for the times when I say sentences and they come out exactly how I wanted them to. Let's try that again. I look like I have jaundice if I don't wear bronzer because I am someone who naturally gets very tan, but because I'm forbidden from going in the sun because it's terrible for you and there's like, you know, the whole cancer thing, I either go in the sun with lots of sunscreen or I don't. Anyway, cool story. My point is, the sun equals bad. And, I mean, it's like good for the earth. Oh my god, this video is really getting away from me. Anyway, the sun's good for the earth, long-term exposure is not good for your skin, but because there's people who have really light skin that look healthy and rosy still when they have light skin because they don't tan, but because I tan, but I don't actually go out and do the tanning of sun-touched skin, make it darker. I look like a jaundice baby and it's really sad, and so I have to wear bronzer to look healthy. Okay, great. Moving on. A few things to keep in mind. Color selection. When I see bronzers that are orangey, I just like to scoot right on past because that's not really what I'm trying to do here, you know what I mean? I think it's best to visualize a foundation shade that's a few shades darker than yours. So if you're at the store and you're looking at them, it's a few shades darker, and then imagine that somebody put like a few little droplets of red into it. That's like gonna be your perfect bronzer color. Finish is another important factor. I don't love bronzers that have a lot of shimmer in them, but I do like a satin or like slightly pearlescent finish, especially for powders, because I don't think that powders tend to be the most skin-like and natural in appearance. So when there's a little bit of pearl or a little bit of satin finish, I think that helps to offset that. But my preference in general for complexion products is pretty much always going to be liquids and creams, unless somebody has very oily skin or I'm in a situation on set where we're shooting in like a really hot environment. And when I say that, I mean like in the summer in Texas or in the tropics and we're doing 12-hour days out in the sun, then like I may sometimes use a powder in that situation. My camera cut out and I did not notice when. So I was saying something about sometimes I use powders, sometimes I use creams. The point is, liquids and creams I think look more natural and skin-like, but if you're going to use a powder for whatever reason, sometimes time and a place, I like something that has a more natural finish, and that means satin or a little bit of pearl as opposed to like a harsh matte in my thoughts. That little spiel also kind of already addressed different types of formulations. Generally speaking, drier skin types will be more comfortable wearing liquids and creams. Oilier skin types will be happier with powders. That's kind of like across the board for complexion products. But that's mostly only relevant on like the extreme ends of the spectrum. If you're anywhere in the general population, this is the general population, then you'll be happy with whatever your preference is. My preference is cream and liquids. An important thing to keep in mind though is that like blends with like, which is something that I've said before and will continue to say, especially as we go through the rest of this series, and you'll get tired of me saying it probably, but basically what that means is that creams and liquids blend really easily, usually, with other creams and liquids, whereas powders blend really well on top of other powders. So you can mix and match if you can, but the point is when people are having a hard time with blending, or they're like putting bronzer on and a lot is going on, or things are streaky, it's helpful to be mindful of if you put on like a liquid or a cream foundation and then you go on with a powder bronzer and blending is hard, then it might be worth it to put on like a translucent powder first, like the RCMA powder or something, because if you lay powder that's sheer on top of your cream liquid product, it's going to be a lot easier to blend a different product on top that has color in it. So basically, a blush or a bronzer that is a powder formula might stick or grab unevenly to a liquid or cream underneath it, but if you put on a layer of translucent powder first, then you're going to have like a nice just powder to powder, like blends with like situation. And the same thing goes for the reverse, whereas if you have already set with powder, or you use a powder foundation and then you try to use a cream or liquid on top, that might be awkward. And some products actually do work well with each other. I kind of know within my kit what works well, like the Milani Luminoso blush, I usually don't ever have to put like powder in between because it blends easily on top of the creams and liquids that I use, but it's just a matter of experimentation, and if it is being tricky or weird, just think about that. I already kind of talked about placement, but in a moment I'm going to scoot back in time to when I had not yet completed my makeup and was about to put on my bronzer, and you'll be able to see the process of applying it and more specifics about the placement. So let's do that now. All right, so I've already done the steps leading up to bronzing as outlined in the rest of this series. I primed my face, I put foundation and concealer on, and now I'm ready to get some tan glow going up in here. Just to recap, I'm using this cream stick bronzer from Milk. I like this color because it's a few shades darker than my skin. It's nice and brown, has a little bit of a red undertone, so it looks natural. Because it is a cream, I have not set my liquid cream foundations and concealers with any powder because it's going to be easier to blend if I don't do that. And normally when I use this, I just twist it up and like dab it on for the placement, and then I blend it with my fingers. But Caspian has done some irreversible thing to it that now I can't get it to twist up, so I'm just gonna use a brush in here because real talk, my makeup for my personal makeup bag is kind of thrashed by Caspian. He does a lot of damage. As with pretty much everything in makeup, the actual execution is pretty simple now that we've covered everything that you need to sort of understand going into it. And we're really just going to focus on placement, so I'm just going to put a little bit of this on my brush. And if you're using bronzer to just make yourself look like you got a little sun, which is kind of its intended purpose at least, then you want to focus on the sun. I don't know if you guys have heard this, is above you and it radiates light downwards onto you. And because of that, natural tans tend to be a little top heavy. So you're going to concentrate most of the color on the high points of your face where the sun actually hits you. That means it's going to be stronger around here. It kind of hits the tops of the cheekbones and nose. And you can use, what I usually do is I hit those spots and then I just use whatever else is on my brush or my fingers to kind of blend it out throughout the rest of me. I think of it sometimes a little bit like a Phantom of the Opera mask, which then I realize doesn't make sense because his mask is lopsided. But don't think too deeply on that analogy. I guess I should just say masquerade mask, whatever, Caitlin. Anyway, so yeah, you're hitting these tops of cheekbones, nose, forehead, and then just kind of blending from there. So putting it on the brush, and then I'm just going to put on my symmetrical Phantom of the Opera mask, aka masquerade mask of bronzer, and just blend. So like I went all over here where I want it to be strongest, and then without applying more product, I went down to the rest of the forehead. And I'm just gonna go along my cheekbone. And just making sure everything's nice and blonded. And one of the things that really helps, I've said many times and will continue to say, is that like blends with like. So if you have bronzer issues and it looks too heavy or intense sometimes, or it's just streaky, just if you're using liquids and creams, stick with liquids and creams. If you're using powders, stick with powders. Really helps. So I'm putting a little bit on the nose. This can start to look crazy if you're using like a product that's too dark or weird color or shimmery, or if you're just putting too much on. So always remember that you can build. And in this case, this is a pretty sheer product, so it's somewhat forgiving. But if you're using something that's more pigmented, just remember you can always apply product to your brush or your fingers, and you can kind of like wipe some off on the back of your hand or a tissue, and then get into your face region. So it looks like I'm applying a ton, but that's just because this is not that pigmented, and also when applying makeup for camera, I have to put a little bit more with the lights and the fact that my camera is not actually a human eyeball, so it doesn't capture detail as well, to compensate so that you can actually see it. So when I'm putting this on in life, I don't sit here applying layer after layer. And then I'm just kind of, like I said, using whatever is left to tap and press throughout the rest of my face. One thing that helps also to tie everything together is applying a little bit on the sides of the neck. And that is basically it. Again, just to reiterate, don't feel like you need to sit there like layering and layering and layering forever. That's really just for camera. Bronzer should be simple. It should just be a wash of color, no big deal, that you just loosely apply to, you know, these main Phantom of the Opera points, and then a little bit more throughout. And it doesn't need to be like a big scary thing. It just helps you look real pretty. Okay, I'm gonna put the rest of my makeup on now. Ta-da! Okay, as usual, I hope that this was helpful and you enjoyed it and you feel mentally and spiritually nourished by it. That might be big expectations for me to have for this bronzer video. But anyway, let me know if you have questions, and don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and follow me on Snapchat, Instagram, and Twitter at Kiki Makeup, and subscribe to the channel or I'll fight you to the death. All right, good talk. I will see you guys soon. Goodbye. Could be true that he's no Prince Charming, but there's something in him that I simply didn't see. When Maybe because he kidnapped your dad. Maybe that distracted you and then imprisoned you. It may have been distracting from his more endearing qualities. Also, I'm just looking at the tweets right now of Donald Trump and Chance the Rapper talking about fighting Joe Biden and listening to Beauty and the Beast and realizing that my camera's still recording. Cool.